Hi everyone, we'll just wait for everyone to join us while our attendees filter in. Some of you will have been here all day for the conference and you'll have seen me before, but for those of you that don't know me, I'm Laura Glennie. I'm one of the Divergent Influencers and I'm going to help you today, hopefully, and facilitate this session. So we'll just give it a moment to check that everyone floods in. Looks good to me. So we'll get started. Yeah, so I'm Laura Glennie. I'm one of the Divergent Influencers. My interests lie in everything from mental health and how mental health is actually quite a vague topic. And I think it's important in all intersectional aspects in life. And I also think it's important to the way we think about relationships and the way we think about sex. So the Divergent Influencers meet regularly and talk about what needs to happen for us to move into adult life. And many of us come with so many questions for sex and relationships that have been bottled up for a while because maybe it's not been the right setting to explore them, or we feel that our, supporters aren't educated enough in the modern day nuances of sex and relationships and all the things that come with that. Many of our members are queer and come from, intersectional backgrounds. So to talk about sex and relationships today, we've got along Eliza, who's a sex educator and body positive champion. Eliza, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So hi, I'm Eliza. I make content online about disability awareness, LGBTQ plus positivity, and then I'm also a freelance content creator for SH24, who are a sexual health charity offering lots of different services for people around sexual health and sexual well-being. And I'm also personally very interested in sex education because I wasn't taught it in school at all. And I was brought up in a kind of Christian household where we did talk about sex, but not that much. So now I'm kind of trying to, talk about it more and open that conversation up.
Right, so hopefully today is the start of that, at least for our network. And like I say, there's been such an appetite to chat about it, and we think that parents and professionals could move to get on board on that and also get a bit more skills on those things. So thank you. The way that today is going to be formatted is hopefully it's pretty relaxed. Obviously the chat box is open and the Q&A box is open for you throughout the session. We'll have a wee presentation from Eliza for the first half, and then we're going to open it up to questions from you lot, and I'm sure that I'll think of something to ask as well. But would you like to take it away with some of the things that you want to bring today?
Yeah, for sure. And just stop me when we get to the time, because I feel like it's such a big topic that we could talk for hours and hours. So just keep an eye on time for me. So yeah, as I said, I am a disabled person. I was born disabled, but have my mobility has declined over the kind of last few years, particularly in the last year or so. But I kind of was born with various different disabilities. And in school, I remember being very interested in sex and sexual health and just not really being taught about it. And alongside that, I was also not taught about different families. What do different families look like within, our society? So I didn't see anybody that had a parent who was a wheelchair user or LGBTQ plus parents or anything like that, because we were just not taught about it. It was not something that was brought up, and it's a problem. It's a big problem. And for me, sexual health and sex education needs to include disabled people for a variety of different reasons, yet I feel like we're lacking that. Obviously, so I'm 25 now, so when I was learning sex education, it was quite a few years ago, but I can tell you for a fact that I currently have a close friend who's going through a course in school to learn about sexual health and education, and they're not including anything about pleasure in that at all. So that's a whole big topic, and that's this year, that we're not talking about that. So it can feel like such a mountain in a way, because it feels like it's such a diverse topic. There's so much work that needs to be done, and within that, we're not including disabled people. I was never taught about how a disabled person has sex. I wasn't even taught what a disabled person was. I thought wheelchair user is a disabled person and that's it. And we were also never taught about that communication. How do you communicate with somebody if you are sleeping with a disabled person? How do you communicate what works for them, and have that conversation? Because that's just something that isn't spoken about at all. I never learned about pleasure, and definitely never learned about it within a disabled person. And we can see it, today. Recently, Victoria's Secrets has launched a campaign using a variety of different disabled people, and has got backlash for including disabled people in that conversation. And that's a real issue. And I guess my question is, why are we not including disabled people within sex education? And I think the answer to that in its core is that people feel uncomfortable that disabled people have sex, because I think that we are often seen as kind of non-sexual beings, as people that, we're lucky if we get a partner. We're lucky if somebody wants to have sex with us. And that's not the case at all. Disabled people are people, and if you are entering into the world and looking to have sexual relationships, people are lucky to have sex with you, disabled or not. And I think that that's where we're really lacking. And it's dangerous as well when we don't include disabled people within the conversation. How are people supposed to know how to communicate if they run into any issues around sexual health? Just some content warning, I'm just going to very lightly talk about sexual assault, but we know that disabled people are statistically much more likely to experience sexual assault than a non-disabled person. And if we're not teaching disabled people about sex, and we're not teaching other people about what it's having sex with a disabled person, what that looks like, how are people supposed to be informed on what to do in those situations, and how to seek help, and even know what is or what isn't sexual assault? Because if you're not taught about it, then why are you going to know? And that's a problem. And being aware of that language and that communication, and what consent is, so that if you run into a problem, you can seek help, and you can seek that communication. And you can also, on a lighter note, just be aware of what you want as a person, as a sexual being, what you enjoy, what is pleasurable to you, because sexual health is such a big part of physical health and mental health and all of that. And there's a lot of evidence to show that having regular sex and enjoying self-pleasure and all of that has long-term great benefits for you. And it's a real problem that we're not including any disabled people in the sexual health narrative. And then what happens is, we see, for me, obviously, I'm an online content creator. For me, then I have people really questioning, oh, you've got a partner, you talk about self-love and self-pleasure, and what, I didn't even know that was a thing. And people are really shocked that we are existing as sexual beings. And I think for those that are going in to teach sex education and sexual health, it will be great to actually get disabled people involved in that conversation, because I think that's also a problem as well, where maybe people are getting sex education, but it's been written by non-disabled people and being taught by non-disabled people from a book. And it's great that, that conversation is being had, but how can we really understand the experience without talking to a variety of different people? Because every single disabled person is going to be different and going to need different things, because disability is such a wide spectrum. And I think lots of the time when we think disabled person, we're thinking person that uses a wheelchair or mobility aids that has limited mobility. But if we're talking about neurodivergent people or autistic people, or people that have mental health issues, they may need a different type of support within that sexual health, and within that sexual experience. So for me, I'm autistic. That impacts my sexual experience, I need to communicate that, my sensory needs. What does that mean for me? Have that conversation, having things in place for if I need to stop, if I need a break, if something's hurting. And how are you supposed to know that if you're not taught it in school? And why are we not having that conversation? For me, kind of online is a great tool because I'm able to speak to other disabled people that are also talking about this. And I think that we are seeing more and more things happening online, and people having the conversation and opening up the conversation, and really diving in and questioning those stereotypes that a disabled person isn't a sexual being, and people feeling automatically uncomfortable about talking about it. And I think it is exciting to see that we are opening up that conversation, but I still feel that there's a real lack of that within schools. And why? It's just like we automatically see somebody, a disabled person, as, you know, that's it, you're disabled, you're not included in that conversation, and that's totally not the case at all. I think another really important part of that is also self-pleasure, and learning about self-pleasure and masturbation, or whatever self-pleasure looks like to you. And within that, kind of, you know, maybe sex is going to look different to you, maybe self-pleasure is going to look different to you, but we kind of have this weird kind of goal, I think, within sexual health, that we think an orgasm is the goal of sex and that's what you're going to do, and therefore if you can't do that, then, you know, you've not had proper sex, which is a conversation that I've seen online, which is certainly not the case. And I know Hannah Witton's done a lot of work on that and is a great source for that, because she talks a lot about how actually the goal of sex is closeness, togetherness, enjoying yourself, pleasure, feeling safe, comfortable, you know, whatever that looks like to you. But that we shouldn't necessarily have these like goals of like, you must orgasm or you must have penetrative sex and that's real sex, which in its core is rooted in homophobia and everything too, and isn't the case at all. So I think it's really important to open that conversation up, and when we're talking about sex in school and we're talking about self-pleasure, that we actually talk about sex as a whole, that it's not just the, you know, action of penetrative sex, whereas actually it's a whole conversation, it's an experience, it's different for everybody, it feels different for everybody, it looks different for everybody, being safe within that situation is different for everybody, and that we have that conversation, we open that conversation up. Because when I was taught in school, I was literally taught like, wear a condom, if you get pregnant it is bad, best thing to do is to not have sex. And when I went into the clinic, the first thing that they did was like, instead of having a conversation with me about, okay, you're thinking about having sex, that's great, this is what you need, this is what it might look like for you, this is what might happen. None of that happened. I just was told, right, you must get put on contraception now. I wasn't given the options of what that might mean, and that was it. It was, you must have, you know, you must get put on contraception.
Eliza,
I had never.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm bursting. It's really interesting, because you spoke about some of the like some of the most extreme consequences that can happen in these moments, like sexual assault and also unplanned pregnancy and all of that, but also just like the day-to-day unhappiness that not exploring these things can cause. I know that like the consequences of at least the divergent influencers not discussing these things in like supported settings is our members are bursting inside to talk about it. I've had like friends who are ashamed to admit that they have a certain like interest or kink, and it turns out that like a lot of people in the group had it, and they're like, oh, I'm not a freak and I thought I was for 18 years. Or you know, even things not just sex but the things around desire. So members who they've heard, so maybe a neurodiverse person who I am close with had heard that it's not good to sexually stare at people in public, which is true, but of course we all have desires when we're in public and notice people that we find attractive, and they thought that by noticing people they were doing something, I guess, predatorial or not good. So
Right.
even just the internal struggle of not exploring these things and the things
Yeah.
that we can carry and hold and believe about ourselves. I hope you don't mind me chiming in there, but
No,
it harks back so much to our experiences in the Divergent Influencers. So it's important.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's interesting. It comes back down to learning, because I think we are really lacking within our society at actually teaching people what is consent, what is okay, what is not, because we're not really taught that in school. At least I wasn't. I wasn't taught, how do you consent, what is consent and what isn't consent. And I think we often talk about the fact that consent is kind of a really hard drawn line, and it is like, it should not be, you should not cross it. However, if you are not taught about what that line looks like and what, how somebody may communicate that, or how you could communicate that, that is a problem. And we need to ensure that when we are talking about it, we are educating people in a way that is also accessible to them. It's not just like putting a video of somebody giving birth on the screen, or like a video of a sperm and egg getting fertilized. Like, that's great of the science side of it, but is sex really science? Because there's so much kind of emotion wrapped in that, and it's your personal experience, that when we're literally just being taught it from a scientific side, I think that we're really failing people, and that's a problem. And where is it in our media? I can name one time that I've seen a disabled person talking about sex, and that's in sex education. I don't know if you've seen that scene, but it's a scene with Isaac and Maeve, and sorry, spoilers if you haven't seen it. But it's been out for ages, so you should have watched it by now. But it's a scene where Isaac and Maeve are kind of having sex, and it doesn't look like a traditional sexual experience, but it's that communication, it's that closeness, it's that togetherness, and that was a really beautiful moment, because it was the first time I've ever seen a disabled person, kind of representing what a sexual experience may look like for them. And I think that's one of the things that I always say is like, that's for that person, because every person is different. And that's why when we talk about sexual health and we talk about sexual pleasure and desire, that we need to be aware that it's a diverse topic and it's different for every person. And so we need to have as many people involved in that conversation. We need to have as many people kind of talking about their experiences within that, so that you can have a diverse experience as possible.
I think as young adults, we do recognise that, there's a lot of nuance to this, there's a lot of things to understand, there's a lot of language, and not, we're talking about disabilities in such a broad way, not everyone's going to have like these conversations in the right language, or at least not verbal conversations. So we are aware of that, but I'd like the focus on pleasure and masturbation, and the idea that fits into self-care. Personally, we've been working in schools and colleges and things, and I know that when what you do to keep yourself well conversation comes up, we'll often ask, what are you going to do tonight to look after yourself? And people sarcastically answer masturbation, like, oh, that sounds like you're being cheeky, but actually it's a great idea. And I can understand that there's a lot of concern around sex and the consequences, but there's things about sex that can really enhance someone's challenges as well, I suppose.
Yeah. And I think that is a side of it that we often miss as well, because I never learned about pleasure in school, particularly not as a disabled person, and how that might be like different. And also I never learned that it's okay to not want to masturbate as well. We never learn about people who maybe don't enjoy that, and that being okay as well. But for me, what's interesting is that I remember kind of starting to explore my body, but we weren't talking about that at school, and then people would feel shameful. I went to kind of like an all-girls school, and so it was something that we didn't really speak about at all. It wasn't brought up, it wasn't a conversation that was had, and it was seen as very shameful if you had sex or masturbated or have, you know, performed self-pleasure, it was seen as like wrong. And I remember playing Would I Lie to You? And one of the questions, not Would I Lie to You, what's it called? The Truth or Dare, that's it. And like people being like, Would I Lie to You is the TV program, isn't it? People were like, oh, I've masturbated. And like all of like the women and like AFAB people were silent. And then, like, you know, all the AMAB people were like, yeah, you know, I've done that. And it's interesting that there does seem to be a bit of a balance there as well. And I think there's a problem with both, because, you know, one, if we feel too shameful to talk about it, that's a problem. Two, I think it's great that people feel confident to talk about it, but if we're expecting people with penises to be really into masturbation and that's my thing, then if you're not, then you could feel like different and the odd one out, but you're not. It's totally normal either way. And within disability in that conversation, I mean, I know that we've just started to see kind of sex toys come out that are kind of catered to disabled people, and there are some great sex toy companies doing great work. So I've done some work with Hot Octopus in the past, kind of promoting their toys, and I think Get Bumpin', that's a new like self sex aid that's coming out, which is really interesting because it's really big. It's like the same size as me, which is really cool, and that's really exciting to see. But there's still not enough really, and I guess there's just that not that conversation of I'm a disabled person, I want to experience self-pleasure. I don't know if it's necessarily going to look like the traditional way that I've seen online, which is where most people are getting this information from. What can I do? And how can we create a space to ensure that people can ask those questions, and, you know, ask questions of, is this normal? Do I need help for this? Can you help me to ensure that I can experience self-pleasure to a degree that is more pleasurable to me? I need to access these toys, and where can I access them? And these are all things that we should be talking about and people should have access to, because it's part of your self-care and it's part of, you know, your mental well-being. If you want to experience self-pleasure and it's something that is enjoyable to you, you should have access to that and be able to access it efficiently.
Yeah, I think that's why we're adamant that this is just, well, at least for our networks, the beginning of conversation, and it's not just like we've touched on that, that's good, we'll pick a different topic. This is quite a commitment.
Yeah,
there are some really complicated questions that I'm certainly not equipped to answer, but I'm so interested in exploring. Abigail's popped in the chat box, I'm really interested in any information about risk assessment and balancing risks and rights around intimate relationships for people with a learning disability, particularly around online contact via video calls. The easiest and safest, they put in whatever that's called, option for parents and professionals is often to prevent or discourage relationships. Yeah, and I'd like to have more information about how risk enablement plans can be put in place. Me too. Me too, but I know that the answer isn't just to say that's a bad idea because it's dangerous. And I know that because people that I interact with every day are doing this anyway, secretly, or more dangerously than if they had great information, or they don't explore their identity and feelings, and that can lead to a range of shame or disappointment. So I don't know if you have further insight on good tools for these things, or you're kind of in the same boat as me.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have any kind of direct tools on exactly how to access those things, but I agree on the sense that I can see why it feels safer to kind of say like, this is dangerous, so let's not do it. But then on the flip side, if we're not talking about it and we're not kind of having conversations with people, they may go and do it anyway, and then that's even more dangerous. And so as I say, I don't have any like exact resources, and this is just me talking from my perspective as somebody who obviously I'm autistic. I struggle a lot with communication, and also struggle to say no in certain situations, and can be quite manipulated into doing things quite easily. Is me being aware of what is okay and what is not okay, and having those things kind of written down so that if I need to communicate them, I can with a card, or if I've learned that it's not okay for somebody to come up to me in the street and do something inappropriate, and because I've had that kind of conversation, I've learned that that's not okay, then I can seek the help and support that I need for that, or I can say no in that situation. So I think that the conversation needs to be had, and I definitely think there are different ways of doing that, and monitoring that as well to ensure that people are doing it as safely as possible, because it's difficult, isn't it? I think we live in a world where online can feel very, very scary. It can also be a really great tool for people to be able to access things. But then if we just turn around and say, no, let's not do that, it's not safe, then what does that mean for somebody when they're on their own, or they access it on their own and they haven't been taught that it's not safe to do this particular action online? But if somebody messages in them and asks them for it, then they may not have been taught that. And if you're not taught it, you're not going to know that it's, right, or safe or not, etc. So yeah, I think it'd be great to see more resources and things available for people, because for me, obviously, I'm kind of talking from my experience as somebody that uses mobility aids and kind of has communication issues sometimes, but as I say, like, the community is so diverse, and that's why it's so important to talk to so many different people about their experiences and what they feel is good and safe for them as a learning tool.
Yeah, it's good to see that Zoe shared their experience in the chat box. They said, as a support worker, our risk enablement was ensuring that people with learning disabilities ensure that there was an understanding what is okay to do in public versus private, like masturbation, but staff would be encouraged not to ignore disabled people's sexuality, but to acknowledge it and ensure safety, which which is similar to the guidance that we would give from our lived experience. Also ensuring that disabled people have as much opportunities to have privacy as possible. So true. As often in supported accommodation, this isn't always the case. And I've heard that from literally young people that are living in hospices and receiving quite intense medical care, all the way to supported accommodation in their 20s and 30s.
Yeah, for sure. I think also ensuring that people have a safe space to ask questions, because, and that can be difficult, I think, sometimes if you're not if you're working with a disabled person, ensuring that they kind of know that if there's something they're not sure about, or whatever that might be, that they can come to you and ask that question. Hey, is this okay? Can I do this here? Is this appropriate? Can I have some guidance here? And I think opening up that space and having a conversation with somebody that isn't going to judge them and can kind of support as best they can is a great tool for that as well.
Yeah, and I had something to add there. Let me think. Yeah, but there is a difference between a support worker or a supporter, a carer, saying, I'm really open, you can talk to me about anything, I'm happy to answer questions, I know about these topics, LGBTQIA plus topics. You can be as open as you want, but I don't think that that's the most conducive to asking questions that can feel super taboo either. And I'm quite excited with the idea of more peer support networks and people like yourself, Eliza, that are maybe closer to the age on Instagram and social media having these conversations too. I feel like
social media is so good.
Areas that we're not.
I was just saying that I think social media is such a good tool, because when people are kind of talking about that, and you have people really trying to open up that conversation, and those kind of more taboo topics, maybe if somebody is kind of nervous to ask somebody a question, etc., then they can go to social media. And I also think we can I guess encourage those conversations. So rather than saying like, I'm a safe space, you can come and speak to me, it can be like, we're going to talk about this today, we're going to talk about self-pleasure, assuming that that relationship's appropriate to do that, but almost setting up like space for those conversations to happen, because it's natural that people may feel embarrassed to ask those questions, and I kind of wish that there were more, I guess, support things like through, I don't know, the NHS, etc., so that you could message somebody or whatever and kind of get that reply. And now we are seeing more things pop up, but I wish that they were kind of more accessible for that. But I guess almost encouraging those questions if it's an appropriate situation to do that, and it's the relationship allows that, to kind of say like, do you have any questions about this topic? Do you have any questions about periods today, or whatever, so that you can kind of encourage that conversation so that people can kind of ask those questions. And I guess that's what sessions like this is so great for, because you can encourage people to really ask and not feel ashamed in any way, because any question is a good question.
Yeah, that'll be why when the opportunity does come up and someone mentions the word sex, it's like, oh yeah. I guess that mine was word vomit. Mine. So yeah, it's clear that there's some things that ARC Scotland and Divergent Influencers can focus on, one of them being that accessible, safe places to explore thing. And then echoing some of the questions earlier coming from Leanne, looking at what supports or programs are used in the UK for learners with severe and profound intellectual disabilities in relationships and sexuality. And myself as an advocate, making sure I'm informed about these things too, because it's easy to delve deep on my lived experience and not represent these important parts too.
Yeah, I think it's a really important conversation to have, and also to be aware of kind of like the disability hierarchy, which definitely does exist, that different disabled people are going to experience different barriers, particularly when it comes to sexual health and experience, depending on kind of how they are viewed by society, and so therefore one disabled person may be more welcome in a conversation about sexual health if it's a disabled person that's seen as oh, you just have problems with your legs, and so it's fine to have this conversation because you're welcome here, compared to somebody else who may be seen as like, no, you're not allowed in this conversation. And that's again a problem because all adults who are able to consent, that want to be involved in the sexual health conversation, should be and should feel welcome to be part of that. And so I think it's really important to be aware of that when we're talking about sexual health, that we're including all disabled people, and that kind of disability hierarchy, we are aware of that, to ensure that we're kind of giving voices to everyone, to ensure that people can talk about their experiences with their conditions, because my experience is going to be very different to somebody else's.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's a difference between informing yourself when you're sort of your own influencer, freelancer, and when you're doing something like me, which is I'm on a group of very distinct people with disabilities and additional support needs, who obviously have the capacity and interest in being in an advocacy group, but we still do things from the broader spectrum. So just to recognise that and say that I do have a commitment to learn more, and I'd join that journey with anyone that's asking questions. Does anyone else from the digital audience want to add questions in the comments box? It's totally open and up to you. Or if you can raise your hand and ask a question. I've just been informed. Zoe shared that many of the disabled adults I supported were regarded as an adult with incapacity under the law, but as per legislation, decision making should still be supported as far as possible, and this applies to sex. Yep. Yeah,
it's so important. And I think when we avoid that conversation, it's just dangerous. I mean, it's just dangerous to, I don't know what else I can say apart from that. The worst it's dangerous, the best it just means that people end up going around uninformed and confused, and nobody wants to be in that situation either. So it's so important that we talk about that in an accessible way for the different people that are there and are talking about it. And there's definitely a lot of work to be done, and I think we see that. I get a lot of negative comments if I post a picture in underwear. I get so many negative comments of people being like, "You're in a wheelchair, one, how do you have sex, which is a lot of people will like non-disabled people in the street, that happens a lot. They'll come up to me and like ask inappropriate questions, and that's, again, when we're talking about sexual health, that's why it's so important to involve non-disabled people in that conversation as well, because I think sometimes we kind of can fall into a bit of a trap where we go like, okay, we're talking about disability and sex, let's round up all the disabled people and have that conversation so that they know. But actually, a disabled person may be sleeping with a non-disabled person, and also non-disabled people need to be aware that they could become disabled at any time, literally any minute. They could be disabled at the time and not be aware of it, or not want to use that label, and that's completely valid. But that, you know, they may, one, become disabled in the future, or two, meet a disabled person and, you know, want to have a sexual relationship with them. So it's really important that it's not just like, okay, you're disabled, we're going to have this conversation with you because you're a wheelchair user, you need to have this conversation. That actually we include, it's included in the whole kind of educational system that we talk about disabled people, and that we see disabled people like in the books. When we open them, we see a wheelchair user, we see somebody using mobility aid or whatever disability it is. We have somebody saying, I'm autistic and, you know, I struggle with sensory needs, so this is what I do to ensure that I feel comfortable and safe during sex, you know. But we're not seeing that at the moment, and it's not even in our TV, and it's not on really spoken about that much online, because so often people are silenced within that. So it's important that we teach everybody about it, not just kind of, you know, just disabled people, and non-disabled people don't need to be involved in that conversation. It's definitely a universal thing.
Yeah, and how do you think we organise the conversation moving forward? So I think that there is something different in the pleasure chat, the masturbation chat, and the self-caring thing versus the relationships, navigating the people, the rules around socialising and those things. Do you have any views on where to start, where to focus, so what should happen next?
Yes, I think the main thing is school and educational settings. It's a really important place to start, because that's where your first sexual experiences are happening. And I think that sexual health is actually failing across all the boards. Like when you look at people over 50, most people over 50 have never had an STI test, and that's absolutely terrifying to me. It's like a really high percentage. So I think we're failing there as well. I mean, that's a separate conversation, but I think we're failing sexual health really across the board. But I think to begin, one, we need to talk about pleasure in school just as a whole, because it's such an important part of sex. Two, we need to include disabled people in that conversation. You know, how does that look in school? I don't know if I necessarily have the answer, but just, I guess, providing an in-depth conversation. I think the problem in school is that sexual health is often one class that you get, and it's like, you know, maybe you might get two, but actually it's such a big topic that it's something that needs to be spoken about regularly, often, to ensure that people kind of have a really round view of what, as much as they can, it is. So I think ensuring that we talk about it in school, we talk about pleasure, what pleasure may look like for a person, we talk about sex, we talk about consent, and ensure that that is taught in a way that is accessible and easy for as many people to understand, so that people can really learn what that is, what that looks like, how to say no. Because like for me, I needed to be taught that, because, you know, not everybody knows how to be like, yeah, I want to say no in this situation. And also, I think ensuring that we're including disabled people in our imagery when we go into sexual health clinics, that we see disabled people on the wall. We're talking to a variety of different disabled people, asking them to kind of publicly talk about it, ensuring that we have disabled people in our media. I mean, we're lacking there on, you know, all grounds, but ensuring that we have disabled characters experiencing pleasure and sex, because although that can kind of feel like, well, that's not real education, I think just seeing yourself on the TV, like, you know, somebody representing you, and, you know, experiencing self-pleasure, having a relationship, can, one, break down that stigma for non-disabled people, and two, can help you feel represented, that, okay, it is okay that I want to have sex, it is okay that I want to, you know, experience self-pleasure or whatever, and just ensuring that we include people in that media. And I think finally, having accessible, inclusive education that can be readily found online is really important for those that aren't in school, so that people can find resources, for those that are working with disabled people, or disabled people themselves can find resources to ensure that they are as well informed as possible.
Thank you so much. There's loads of points to start with there. And members.
Sorry, that was a really long list, wasn't it?
No. There's plenty to Google. I'm gonna get bumping tonight. Have a look.
Yeah,
Someone else shared
cool.
about some campaigners in the past that spoke about these things, like Tuppy Owens. I'll be Googling this person. And yeah, different organizations that can be helpful, like Get Together. There's a lot here to start this chat now. Feel activated for that. And to thank you for your time, to hope that the audience, are feeling ready to join us in that chat, and to let you know that we'll be back in the main room at 4:20. So for those that are online, to go back to the main link for the conference. So thank you for your time, Eliza, and just, brilliant.
Thank you for listening.
Great. So we'll see everyone back in the room after a short break, and thank you. Have a good weekend. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.